The entire galaxy laughed at him for claiming a queen as family, right up until she walked into the courtroom. The air inside the Hall of Interstellar Justice felt colder than space itself. White light poured from towering crystal panels nearly 200 feet above the polished black floor, washing thousands of spectators in a pale glow. Representatives from more than 60 star systems filled the massive circular chamber. Some sat in floating observation platforms. Others watched from private diplomatic balconies carved into the silver walls. Above them all hovered dozens of recording drones, broadcasting every second across the known galaxy. In the very center of that immense room stood Ethan Walker. Alone. Human. Small. At least compared to everyone else. Most species present towered over him. 8 feet tall. 9 feet tall. Some even larger. Ethan looked almost fragile among them. His gray civilian jacket was old but clean. His boots were worn from years of travel. A thin silver chain disappeared beneath his collar. Other than that, he carried nothing that suggested power, wealth, or importance. Which was exactly why so many people were laughing. "That's him?" One alien merchant sneered from a nearby balcony. "The human?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I expected someone taller. I expected someone smarter. I expected someone who understood how ridiculous this sounds." Ethan heard every word. He said nothing. Years of hard work had taught him that silence often weighed more than arguments. Still, even he could feel the pressure building inside the chamber. The accusation displayed above the courtroom in glowing blue letters was impossible to ignore. Fraudulent claim of royal kinship. The words floated 30 feet above his head. Thousands stared at them. Then stared at him. Then laughed again. A metallic voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Proceedings will resume in 6 minutes." The announcement only fueled more conversation. More whispers. More jokes. Ethan kept his eyes forward. The polished floor reflected the bright lights overhead. His own reflection looked tired. Older than 38. Maybe because life had a way of adding years when nobody was watching. Across the room, 3 members of the Galactic Prosecution Council reviewed holographic documents. They looked confident. Relaxed. One of them glanced toward Ethan and smirked. To them, the outcome was already decided. A nobody from Earth had claimed a relationship with the most powerful woman in known space. According to the evidence, he had repeatedly refused opportunities to deny it. According to the media, he had spent years carrying a mysterious symbol linked to the Varen royal dynasty. According to public opinion, he was either insane or seeking attention. Neither explanation earned much sympathy. A pair of young diplomats passed near the defendant platform. One of them laughed openly. "Look at him." "What?" "That's the man who claims the queen is his sister." More laughter. "Brother," the other corrected. "Apparently she's his sister." "Even worse." They continued walking. Ethan remained motionless. The chain beneath his collar felt heavier than usual. His fingers brushed the hidden pendant for only a moment before falling back to his side. He remembered the day he found it. He remembered the storm. The cold. The fear in a pair of unfamiliar golden eyes. Memories flickered through his mind like distant stars. Then vanished. The past no longer mattered. Not here. Not today. Another announcement echoed through the chamber. 5 minutes until sentencing review. That phrase changed the atmosphere instantly. Sentencing review. Not trial. The trial had already happened. The verdict had already been delivered. Today existed only to finalize the consequences. The spectators loved that part. Public humiliation always drew crowds. Especially when the accused was foolish enough to challenge royalty. High above the courtroom, enormous observation windows revealed a slice of space beyond the station. Stars glittered against endless darkness. Ships drifted like tiny sparks around the orbital capital. Somewhere beyond those stars, entire civilizations were watching. Billions of viewers. Maybe trillions. Every one of them waiting for the same thing. Ethan Walker's fall. Near the prosecution platform, A reporter adjusted her recording device. Public sentiment remains overwhelmingly negative, she said to her audience. Experts agree the defendant fabricated his connection to Queen Serafina Vera. Analysts predict the tribunal will issue a permanent interstellar ban within the hour. Her assistant nodded. Any chance the Queen responds personally? The reporter laughed. To him? Absolutely not. More laughter. Everywhere. Ethan slowly inhaled. Slowly exhaled. The recycled air smelled faintly of polished metal and electrical systems. He focused on that. Focused on breathing. Focused on staying calm. Because deep down, beneath the noise, beneath the humiliation, beneath the impossible situation unfolding around him, a small part of him still believed something. Not hope. Not confidence. Just a quiet certainty. The kind that survives long after logic gives up. Then suddenly every light in the courtroom dimmed. The laughter stopped. Instantly. Thousands of heads turned toward the massive entrance gates at the far end of the chamber. A deep tone resonated through the floor itself. One note. Then another. Then another. The ancient ceremonial sequence reserved for only one person in the galaxy. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow. The giant silver doors began to open. And for the first time all day, nobody was laughing. The enormous silver doors continued to slide apart with a low mechanical hum that seemed to vibrate through every seat in the Hall of Interstellar Justice. The chamber stood frozen. Thousands of spectators remained silent as rows of royal guards entered first, their polished armor reflecting streams of white light across the black floor. Each step was perfectly synchronized. Each movement precise. The atmosphere that had felt almost festive moments earlier now carried the weight of something ancient. Something powerful. Ethan Walker remained standing at the center platform. His expression did not change, but his pulse quickened. Across the chamber, reporters suddenly lowered their voices. Diplomats straightened in their seats. Even the prosecution counsel looked less confident than before. Then she appeared. Queen Serafina Vera stepped through the gateway beneath the towering arch of silver crystal. Her deep blue skin seemed almost luminous beneath the ceremonial lights. Silver-white hair flowed across her shoulders like liquid metal. A black and gold royal cloak followed behind her, carried by invisible gravitic threads. Her golden eyes surveyed the courtroom once. Only once. Yet somehow it felt as if she had seen everything. The entire chamber immediately rose to its feet. Every ambassador. Every senator. Every military representative. The only sound came from the distant hum of recording drones floating high above. Ethan watched her approach. It had been years. Longer than he cared to count. Time changed people. Responsibility changed them even more. The frightened child he once remembered existed nowhere in the figure now walking through the center aisle. This was a queen. The ruler of 17 systems. A woman whose signature could alter the fate of entire worlds. Yet as she moved closer, Ethan noticed something familiar. A tiny habit. A slight tilt of her head whenever she focused on something important. The same habit she had possessed years ago. The realization stirred memories he had spent a long time trying to bury. Serafina reached the elevated royal platform and took her seat. The room remained standing until she gave a subtle nod. Then thousands sat at once. The chief magistrate activated the central tribunal display. Blue holographic symbols appeared overhead. Your Majesty, he began respectfully. We appreciate your presence during these proceedings. Serafina's voice was calm. I was informed this case concerns an individual accused of falsely claiming royal association. Correct, Your Majesty. The magistrate gestured toward Ethan. The defendant repeatedly carried a protected Veyron symbol and failed to deny rumors connecting him to the royal family. Murmurs spread through the audience. The Queen listened without interruption. Her face revealed nothing. The evidence? She asked. One prosecutor stepped forward confidently. Extensive, Your Majesty. Witness statements, public records, media documentation, and repeated observations spanning several years. A holographic image appeared above the courtroom. The image showed Ethan standing on a distant colony world. Around his neck hung the silver chain. Another image followed. Then another. Then another. Different worlds. Different years. Same pendant. Same man. The prosecutor smiled slightly. This symbol belongs exclusively to House Vera. The audience nodded. Many had already seen the evidence. The case appeared obvious. Ethan looked upward at the floating images. He felt strangely detached. As if he were watching someone else's life unfold. The defendant never publicly claimed royal status, another prosecutor added. However, he repeatedly allowed assumptions to spread unchecked. An act interpreted as deliberate deception. More agreement echoed throughout the chamber. The magistrate folded his hands. The tribunal therefore recommends permanent exclusion from all Veran territories and official sanctions under interstellar fraud statutes. The words settled heavily over the room. Reporters immediately began transmitting updates. Spectators whispered excitedly. Ethan simply stood where he was. The sentence no longer surprised him. In truth, he had expected worse. Then something unexpected happened. Queen Seraphina leaned slightly forward. Her golden eyes remained fixed on Ethan. Not on the evidence. Not on the prosecutors. Only on him. Defendant Ethan Walker, she said. Her voice carried effortlessly throughout the chamber. Ethan looked up. Yes, Your Majesty. The room grew even quieter. How long have you carried that pendant? She asked. The question caught everyone off guard. Ethan hesitated. Approximately 16 years. A visible ripple moved through the audience. The prosecutors exchanged confused looks. That was not part of the procedure. 16 years? Seraphina repeated softly. Her expression remained unreadable. And where did you obtain it? For the first time since entering the courtroom, Ethan glanced down at the silver chain beneath his collar. His fingers closed gently around it. Memories surfaced again. Snow. Darkness. Fear. A small hand gripping his sleeve. He looked back toward the throne. Someone gave it to me, he answered quietly. A very long time ago. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The enormous chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the recording drones hovering beneath the ceiling remained perfectly still. Queen Seraphina's golden eyes never left Ethan. The prosecutors shifted uneasily. The chief magistrate glanced between them, sensing that the hearing was moving somewhere unexpected. Ethan could feel thousands of eyes fixed on him. 16 years. The number echoed through his mind. 16 years since a snow-covered world at the edge of explored space. 16 years since a frightened child had entered his life for only a few weeks and somehow changed it forever. The magistrate cleared his throat. Your Majesty, while the origin of the object may hold personal significance, the tribunal must remain focused on the matter of fraudulent association. Seraphina did not look away from Ethan. I am aware of the matter. Her calm response immediately silenced the magistrate. She slowly rose from her throne. The movement alone sent a ripple through the chamber. Royal protocol rarely allowed the Queen to stand during judicial review. Something important was happening. Nobody knew what. Seraphina descended the first step of the elevated platform. Then another. Her cloak flowed behind her in soft waves of black and gold. The sound of her footsteps echoed faintly across the polished floor. Ethan remained still. His heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. Across the audience platforms, whispers began spreading. What is she doing? This is highly unusual. Has she recognized him? Impossible. The prosecutors exchanged worried looks. Their confidence was fading. One of them activated a private holographic display, reviewing records again as though searching for a mistake. Seraphina stopped halfway between the throne and the defendant platform. Mr. Walker, she said. You said someone gave you the pendant. Yes, Your Majesty. And you never attempted to sell it? Ethan blinked. No, you never used it to gain access to royal facilities? No. You never requested favors from the Varen government? Never. Each answer arrived without hesitation. The Queen studied him carefully. Her expression remained composed, but something softer flickered behind her eyes. Something only a few people in the room noticed. Then why keep it? She asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the chain beneath his collar. For a moment he considered giving the simple answer. Because it was a gift. Because it mattered. But the truth was more complicated than that. Because I made a promise, he said. Silence followed. The words landed differently than anyone expected. Not dramatic. Not defensive. Just honest. Seraphina's gaze lowered briefly. Almost as if she were remembering something. One prosecutor stepped forward. Your Majesty, the defendant's personal attachment is irrelevant. The issue before this tribunal remains his refusal to correct public assumptions linking him to the royal family. The prosecutor activated another holographic display. Headlines filled the air above the courtroom. Human connected to royal bloodline. Mystery figure seen wearing Varen symbol. Possible royal relative appears on frontier colony. The audience nodded. This was the evidence they recognized. This was the story everyone believed. For years, the prosecutor continued. He allowed speculation to spread. Ethan finally spoke before being prompted. Nobody asked? A few spectators laughed. The prosecutor frowned. You expect this tribunal to believe that? Ethan shrugged slightly. Most people assumed whatever they wanted. I spent my time working. The answer produced even more confusion. It was not the response of someone seeking status. It was not the response of someone trying to defend himself. It sounded annoyingly sincere. The prosecutor pressed forward. And yet you never denied the rumors. Ethan looked around the massive chamber. Thousands watched him. Entire civilizations waited for his answer. Because the rumors were not important, he said. The truth was. A strange stillness followed. The prosecutor opened his mouth to argue but hesitated. The statement sounded simple. Yet something about it unsettled the room. Seraphina resumed walking. One step. Then another. Her guards exchanged uncertain glances but did not interfere. The distance between Queen and defendant gradually disappeared. Cameras zoomed closer. Commentators across the galaxy fell silent. Nobody wanted to miss a second. Ethan watched her approach. He noticed details he had forgotten. The way she carried herself. The calm confidence. The faint silver pattern near her left temple that marked Varen royalty. Years had transformed her into someone extraordinary. Yet somehow she still seemed familiar. Seraphina stopped only 10 feet away. Close enough now to see every line on Ethan's face. Every trace of age. Every scar left by difficult years. Her eyes dropped to the chain around his neck. The pendant remained hidden beneath the fabric of his shirt. Would you show it to me? She asked. The request sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Gasps spread through the audience. Prosecutors stared in disbelief. The chief magistrate nearly forgot to breathe. Slowly, carefully, Ethan reached beneath his collar and pulled the pendant into view. The silver symbol caught the courtroom lights instantly. And the moment Seraphina saw it, all color seemed to drain from the faces of several senior Varen officials seated behind the throne. The pendant rested in Ethan's open palm, suspended from its worn silver chain. Under the courtroom lights, intricate patterns emerged across its surface. What most observers had assumed was merely a royal emblem suddenly revealed layers of craftsmanship almost nobody in the galaxy had seen before. Thin silver lines curved around a small crystal center no larger than a dime. Tiny symbols surrounded it, etched so delicately they were nearly invisible from a distance. Several Varen officials rose from their seats without realizing they were doing it. One elderly advisor stared at the pendant with wide eyes. Another pressed a trembling hand against the edge of his desk. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Reporters immediately began whispering into their communication devices. The chief magistrate frowned. What is the meaning of this? He asked. Nobody answered. Queen Seraphina stepped closer. 5 feet. 4. 3. The enormous chamber had become so quiet that Ethan could hear the faint hum of environmental systems hidden behind the walls. Seraphina looked down at the pendant. Her golden eyes softened. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her royal composure seemed to crack ever so slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for Ethan. She reached out slowly. Not to take the pendant, only to touch its edge. The moment her fingers brushed the silver surface, a faint blue glow awakened within the crystal center. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. The light was soft, gentle, almost warm. It illuminated Seraphina's face and reflected in her eyes. The prosecutors looked horrified. "That is impossible," one of them whispered. Another hurriedly accessed the database through his wrist console. His face turned pale seconds later. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." Seraphina never looked away from the pendant. "No," the single word carried through the hall. Firm. Final. The prosecutor lowered his eyes immediately. Thousands of spectators exchanged confused glances. They had expected humiliation. They had expected punishment. Instead, they were watching the most powerful woman in the galaxy stare at a simple pendant as though it contained something priceless. Ethan remained silent. He had never fully understood what the object represented. He only knew he had promised never to lose it. 16 years earlier, that promise had seemed important. Today it felt monumental. Seraphina finally lifted her gaze toward him. "You kept it all this time." Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet every microphone in the room captured it. Ethan nodded. "I said I would." The Queen closed her eyes briefly. Around them, confusion continued spreading through the audience. Commentators struggled to explain what viewers were witnessing. Social feeds across dozens of worlds exploded with speculation. None of it mattered. At that moment, the courtroom felt strangely small. As though only 2 people occupied it. Seraphina opened her eyes again. "Did you ever activate it?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "I never knew it could do anything." A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The expression lasted less than a second but transformed her entire face. Several senior officials looked stunned. Many had never seen the Queen smile in public. "Of course you did not," she said softly. "You never cared what it was worth." One prosecutor stepped forward despite his obvious discomfort. "Your Majesty, with respect, the tribunal still requires clarification regarding the defendant's alleged relationship to the royal family." The Queen turned toward him. The warmth disappeared instantly. Not anger. Not hostility. Simply authority. Pure and absolute. "Clarification," she repeated. "Yes, Your Majesty." Seraphina looked around the courtroom. Her gaze moved across ambassadors, judges, reporters, military officers, and spectators. Then she looked upward toward the floating drones broadcasting to billions across known space. Finally, she returned her attention to Ethan. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Nobody dared interrupt. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Something was happening. Something bigger than he had imagined. The Queen took one final step forward until only an arm's length separated them. Then, to the astonishment of every person present, she lowered her head slightly. It was not a bow. Not quite. But it was close enough to make half the chamber stop breathing. "There is indeed a misunderstanding," Seraphina said. The prosecutor exhaled with relief. "Thank you, Your Majesty. You misunderstand the nature of his connection to this throne." The relief vanished immediately. The Queen's golden eyes never left Ethan. Memories flickered behind them now. Old memories. Precious memories. The kind carried for a lifetime. "Because this pendant," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "was never issued to a diplomat." The room remained frozen. "It was never granted to an ally." More silence. And it was never awarded for service. The blue crystal glowed brighter between Ethan's fingers. Seraphina's expression softened once more. Then she spoke words that caused every Varen official in the room to rise to their feet at once. It was given to the person who once saved a lost child and asked for nothing in return. The words settled over the hall of interstellar justice like a wave moving across still water. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The blue glow from the pendant reflected across the polished floor and danced faintly across the faces of thousands of stunned spectators. Ethan stood frozen. He had expected many things when he entered the courtroom. Public embarrassment. Exile. Accusations. None of those possibilities had prepared him for this. Across the chamber, reporters stared at their displays in disbelief. Several forgot to speak entirely. One commentator opened her mouth 3 separate times before any words emerged. "We are witnessing something unprecedented," she finally whispered to her audience. "The Queen appears to be personally connecting the defendant to an event from her past." The statement spread instantly across billions of screens. Yet inside the courtroom, attention remained fixed on only 2 people. Seraphina looked at Ethan as though the years between them had vanished. The immense throne room. The diplomats. The cameras. None of it seemed important anymore. The chief magistrate finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "are you suggesting this individual once assisted a member of the royal household?" Seraphina turned toward him. "I am not suggesting anything." Her tone remained calm. "I am stating a fact." Another wave of whispers moved through the audience. The magistrate swallowed. "Then perhaps the tribunal would benefit from additional context." For a moment, Seraphina said nothing. Her golden eyes drifted toward the massive observation windows overlooking the stars. Ethan recognized that expression. He had seen it years ago. It always appeared whenever she was remembering something painful. Something important. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. Softer. More personal. 16 years ago, a transport vessel disappeared beyond the northern trade corridors. Several Varen officials immediately lowered their heads. The audience listened in complete silence. The incident was never publicly discussed. Certain records were sealed. Certain details were removed from official archives. The prosecutors exchanged nervous looks. Whatever story was unfolding clearly reached far beyond their investigation. Seraphina continued. "A young child became separated from everyone she knew." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Images began returning more clearly now. Endless snow. Gray skies. Frozen wind. The child found herself stranded on a frontier world during the cold season. The Queen paused. Alone. No dramatic music. No grand speeches. Just a single word. Alone. Somehow it carried more weight than anything else. Ethan looked down at the pendant resting in his hand. The metal felt warm now. Warm despite the cool air of the courtroom. "Rescue teams searched for weeks," Seraphina said. "Governments became involved. Entire fleets participated." She gave a faint smile. "None of them found her." A nervous laugh escaped somewhere in the audience before quickly dying away. Nobody knew how to react. The story felt too personal. Too real. Seraphina slowly turned back toward Ethan. Instead, she was found by a mechanic. A few heads turned toward Ethan immediately. "A human mechanic," she added. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The memories were impossible to stop now. He remembered a small figure collapsed beside an abandoned communications tower. He remembered thinking she looked impossibly young. Frightened. Exhausted. He remembered carrying her nearly half a mile through heavy snow because she was too tired to continue walking. He had never asked who she was. Never cared. She was just a child who needed help. Seraphina's voice softened even further. He gave her food before asking questions. Several spectators shifted uncomfortably. He repaired an old heating unit so she would not be cold. More silence. He shared the last available room in his small cabin because he believed children should never sleep outside. Ethan stared at the floor. He had forgotten some of those details. Life had a way of burying old memories beneath new responsibilities. Yet hearing them now felt strangely overwhelming. Across the courtroom, one elderly Varen advisor quietly wiped moisture from his eyes. Nobody mocked him. Nobody dared. When rescue finally arrived, Serafina said, the child attempted to repay him. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. You tried to give me a bag full of gemstones. The courtroom blinked. Then Serafina laughed. A real laugh. Bright. Warm. Unexpected. The sound echoed through the massive chamber, and somehow changed everything. I was 6 years old, she said. It seemed like a reasonable solution. For the first time all day, laughter spread through the audience as well. Not cruel laughter. Not mocking laughter. Human laughter. Gentle. Understanding. The tension that had gripped the room for hours finally began to crack. Ethan shook his head. I told you to keep them. You did. Serafina looked at him carefully. And then you told me something else. Ethan frowned slightly. He genuinely could not remember. The Queen's expression grew emotional. You told me family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by the people who stay when they do not have to. Silence returned immediately. Not an uncomfortable silence. A meaningful one. The kind that settles over a room when everyone realizes they are hearing the truth. The maintenance corridor hummed with the steady pulse of the station's aging fusion grid as Ethan followed Ilara through a maze of service tunnels rarely seen by diplomats or officers. The polished halls of the upper levels felt impossibly distant here. Warm air drifted from ventilation shafts overhead. Pipes vibrated behind metal walls. Somewhere far below, heavy machinery groaned like a sleeping giant. Ilara walked several steps ahead, her silver-blue cloak brushing softly against the deck plating. Either of them spoke for nearly a minute. The silence was not uncomfortable. It carried the weight of everything they had already survived together. Finally, she slowed beside a narrow observation port overlooking the industrial district. Thousands of workers moved beneath them. Cargo lifters crawled across illuminated tracks. Maintenance crews repaired damaged infrastructure left behind by the recent solar storm. Ethan rested his hands on the railing. You wanted to show me something? He asked quietly. Ilara nodded. Her luminous eyes remained fixed on the workers below. Do you know what my people teach their children? She asked. Ethan shook his head. That value is measured by contribution. Every citizen is evaluated. Every action is recorded. Every resource must produce measurable return. She folded her hands behind her back. Compassion is considered inefficient. Ethan glanced at her. That explains a lot. A faint smile touched her lips before disappearing. 3 cycles ago, a worker down there lost his family during an accident. Production dropped. His supervisors recommended reassignment. She pointed toward a distant platform. A human engineer volunteered to cover his shifts without compensation. Ethan followed her gesture. And? The reports described the decision as irrational. Ethan laughed softly. Sounds human. Ilara looked at him then. Really looked at him. The artificial lights reflected inside her eyes like distant stars. That is what troubles me. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Me? Your species. Her voice lowered. The more I study humanity, the less your behavior follows any predictable model. She turned back toward the window. You help strangers. You sacrifice opportunities. You protect individuals who offer nothing in return. You willingly endure hardship for people who may never repay you. Ethan considered that for a moment. Maybe not everything needs a return. That is exactly the problem. The frustration in her voice surprised him. Every equation requires balance. Every exchange requires value. She exhaled slowly. Yet every time I think I understand your logic, you do something impossible. Ethan leaned against the railing. Like what? Ilara's expression softened. Like staying. The answer hung between them. The machinery below continued its endless rhythm. Ethan looked away first. You make it sound heroic. It was. No. He shook his head. It was just the right thing to do. Ilara stared at him in disbelief. Do you realize how often humans say that? Ethan smiled. Probably. And yet none of you seem aware how extraordinary it sounds. For a long moment she remained silent. Then she stepped closer to the observation port. Among my people, kindness is usually strategic. Her reflection appeared beside his in the glass. It earns status, influence, obligation. She hesitated. When you helped me, you expected nothing. Ethan could hear something fragile beneath her normally controlled voice. I expected you to survive. The station lights flickered briefly as power redistributed across the district. Shadows shifted around them. Ilara lowered her gaze. Do you know what the council asked me before this mission? Ethan waited. They asked whether humanity represented a threat. She gave a bitter laugh. I told them your technology was primitive compared to ours. Your fleets were smaller. Your political systems were chaotic. Ethan smirked. Not exactly flattering. No. Her eyes met his again. Because I completely misunderstood the danger. Ethan frowned. Danger? Ilara nodded slowly. Humanity changes people. The words landed harder than either of them expected. She looked away immediately after saying them. Below, a worker dropped a tool. Another worker retrieved it and handed it back. A simple gesture. Meaningless by most standards. Yet neither of them missed it. Ethan watched the exchange through the glass. Maybe that's not a danger. Ilara followed his gaze. The corners of her mouth softened. Perhaps. The station continued to hum around them. Endless machines. Endless calculations. Endless systems measuring efficiency and output. Yet standing there beside a human who refused to think in terms of profit, Ilara felt something quietly shifting inside her. Something no algorithm could quantify. And for the first time in her life, she was not certain she wanted it measured at all. The warning tone did not sound loud inside the maintenance corridor. It sounded tired. A thin metallic pulse repeating every few seconds while cold white lights flickered overhead. Ethan stopped walking. So did Lyra. For a moment neither spoke. The station around them seemed to be holding its breath. Frost crept across a damaged conduit along the wall. Somewhere deep below, a reactor pump groaned like an old machine refusing to die. Ethan looked toward the sealed blast door at the end of the corridor. The emergency display above it flashed the same message again and again. Containment failure. Lyra read it in silence. Her silver eyes reflected the warning lights. The color made her look less like a royal heir and more like a frightened traveler stranded far from home. Ethan noticed it immediately. She was trying to hide her fear. She always did. How bad is it? He asked. Lyra exhaled slowly. Worse than I hoped. The words hung between them. Beyond the door lay the primary energy core that kept the station alive. Without it, every life support system would fail. Thousands of civilians sheltered in the lower habitat rings. Families. Workers. Children. People who would never know their lives depended on a corridor that smelled of hot metal and recycled air. Ethan stepped closer to the display. Can it be fixed? Lyra hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Yes, she finally said. But not remotely. The reactor required a manual stabilization sequence. Someone had to enter the containment chamber and reconnect the damaged control lattice by hand. Ethan stared at the reactor diagram. Even without understanding alien engineering, he could see the problem. Radiation levels were rising fast. Anyone inside would be exposed. How long? He asked. 7 minutes. To fix it? To survive. Silence returned. A cooling fan rattled somewhere overhead. Ethan rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. 7 minutes? Not much time. Not enough for debate. Lyra stepped in front of the access panel. I will do it. Ethan immediately shook his head. No. This station belongs to my people. Those people need you alive. Her jaw tightened. They need a leader willing to sacrifice herself. Ethan almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the expression in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen before battles, before impossible choices, before moments that changed lives forever. Lyra, he said quietly, a dead leader cannot rebuild anything. And a dead human can? She fired back. The question struck harder than she intended. For a second neither moved. Then Ethan smiled. Not because he found the situation amusing. Because he had finally made up his mind. Good thing I am not planning on dying. Lyra's expression broke. Just a little. Enough for him to see the fear underneath. Ethan. Listen to me. He stepped forward. The emergency lights painted red shadows across the corridor walls. The storm had finally spent its anger. What remained was silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that settled over a world after fate had made its decision. The emergency beacons along the ridge flashed through sheets of drifting snow, their amber light reflecting across the frozen hull of the damaged relay station. Ethan stood beside the fractured observation window, his gloved hands resting against the cold metal frame. Below, hundreds of vessels hovered beyond the mountain range. Their formations stretched across the horizon like a second sunrise. He did not need military training to understand what he was seeing. Nobody sent a fleet for a forgotten outpost. Nobody deployed that many ships for a stranded traveler. Behind him, the chamber doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. The sound was soft. Careful. Almost hesitant. Ethan turned. Lyra stood there. The white medical bandages around her shoulder had been replaced by ceremonial armor unlike anything he had seen before. Silver plates flowed across her frame like liquid moonlight. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the edges. She looked taller somehow. Not because of the armor. Because she was no longer hiding. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The ventilation system hummed overhead. Snow tapped against the glass. Somewhere deep inside the station, an aging generator groaned under the strain of another night. Finally, Ethan smiled. That looks expensive. Lyra's lips trembled. The expression was almost a laugh. Almost a cry. You always do that. Do what? Make impossible moments feel normal. Ethan shrugged. It is a gift. Her golden eyes lowered. For the first time since he had met her, uncertainty crossed her face. Not fear. Not pride. Something far more human. The fleet arrived because of me. I figured. You should know the truth before they come inside. Ethan remained silent. She stepped closer. The light from the observation window painted silver patterns across her armor. My name is not Lyra. The words lingered in the air. It is Lyra Ve Solarin, first daughter of the Stellar Dominion, heir to the imperial throne. The station suddenly felt very small. Not because of what she said. Because of the weight she carried. Ethan remembered the wounded stranger he had dragged through a blizzard. The exhausted woman who had fallen asleep beside a maintenance heater. The stubborn patient who argued every time he changed her bandages. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Okay. Lyra blinked. Okay? You are still the same person. Ethan. Her voice cracked. Entire sectors have gone to war over my safety. Sounds exhausting. My disappearance nearly caused an interstellar crisis. That also sounds exhausting. A faint laugh escaped her despite herself. Then the laugh vanished. Her eyes grew wet. You do not understand. Ethan stepped closer. Then help me understand. She inhaled slowly. My people do not rescue the weak. We protect value. Status. Bloodlines. Influence. When my escort vessel was destroyed, every calculation said I was already dead. Every protocol favored containment over risk. She looked away toward the distant fleet. You were the only person who did not ask who I was worth. The room became quiet again. Ethan remembered the frozen night. The blood in the snow. The way she had struggled simply to remain conscious. He remembered giving her the last thermal blanket. The last ration pack. The last charged power cell. Not because she was important. Because she was there. Where I come from, he said softly. You help people because they need help. Lyra stared at him. The moisture in her eyes caught the amber light. That is why they will never understand humans. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Who? My advisors. My generals. My mother. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They spent decades trying to understand why humanity keeps changing every system it touches. They studied your weapons. Your industries. Your ships. She swallowed. They never studied your mercy. Outside, the fleet lights shimmered through the snow. Inside, the distance between them seemed smaller than ever. Lyra reached into the folds. The first light of dawn spilled across the crystalline towers of the Solarian capital like liquid gold, turning every window into a shard of fire. Commander Will Watson stood quietly on a balcony overlooking a city that had once seemed impossibly distant from everything he knew. The air carried the faint scent of flowering sky vines and the distant hum of transit vessels crossing the morning horizon. For the first time in many months, there were no alarms. No negotiations waiting behind sealed doors. No military reports demanding signatures. Only silence. Beside him, Queen Aurelia rested her forearms on the railing, her copper hair moving gently in the breeze. The galaxy had changed faster than anyone expected. What began as a crash landing on a frozen world had become the foundation of something larger than treaties and trade agreements. Human engineers now worked openly alongside Solarian scientists. Merchant vessels crossed borders that had remained closed for generations. Schools on both worlds taught the story not as a political event, but as a lesson. One act of compassion had succeeded where centuries of power had failed. Aurelia watched the distant skyline for a long moment before speaking. They still argue about us in the council. Will smiled. Humans argue about everything too. It is practically a cultural requirement. A faint laugh escaped her. The sound still surprised him sometimes. The first day they met, she had worn authority like armor. Now there were moments when the queen disappeared, leaving only the woman beneath the crown. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Will turned toward her. Getting stranded on an alien planet? No. Her golden eyes found his. Choosing this life. The question lingered between them. Far below, thousands of citizens moved through streets that no longer feared the future. Children from two species played together in parks built after the treaty. Cargo ships carried food, medicine, and technology instead of suspicion. Entire worlds had begun changing because two stubborn people refused to act according to expectations. Will looked across the city once more. Not for a second. Aurelia lowered her gaze briefly, as if absorbing the answer. Neither do I. The wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the city, temple bells echoed across the valley. Their soft tones rolled through the morning air like distant memories. A movement near the balcony entrance caught Will's attention. A young attendant approached carrying a small sealed case. The attendant bowed respectfully and offered it to the queen before quietly departing. Aurelia studied the case for a moment before opening it. Inside rested a simple metal object. Not a royal artifact. Not a weapon. Just a damaged piece of shuttle plating, polished until it reflected the sunlight. Will recognized it immediately. A fragment from the wreck that had brought him to her world. They recovered it from the crash site, Aurelia said softly. The restoration teams found it beneath the ice. Will accepted the fragment carefully. Time had scarred its surface. Burn marks remained visible beneath the polish. Evidence of failure. Evidence of survival. Evidence of a journey either of them had expected. Funny, he murmured. The entire galaxy changed because this thing fell out of the sky. Aurelia stepped closer. Not because it fell. Her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had finally understood the answer. Because of what happened after. Will looked at her. No throne room surrounded her now. No ceremonial guards. No banners. Just morning light reflected in golden eyes. The stars that once separated them felt impossibly far away. Together they stood at the edge of the balcony, while the city awakened beneath them. Above, traffic lanes glimmered across the sky. Beyond them, distant ships crossed toward new destinations. The future moved forward one small choice at a time.